What's up everybody, Demon back. Welcome to a brand new video. Today we're going to be breaking down The Walking Dead Season 7, Episode 9, Rock in the Road. This episode starts out with Gabriel on watch, right where we left off last season with that post-credit scene. Gabriel goes down, starts walking through the streets of Alexandria. Soon we hear a crash in the pantry. We don't quite know what happens there. This might be when the person with the boots from last season introduces themselves to him, holds him at gunpoint most likely. All of a sudden, we just cut to him raiding the pantry, stealing all the food, going through the logbook. We'll talk about what's in the logbook here in a second. Raiding all the weapons, dropping a notebook, a holy Bible that he writes notes in, and then hopping in a car and driving out of there with all the food and all the weapons. A lot of people are wondering, why'd he steal everything and run off? Gabriel's a sucky character. I hate Gabriel. This is actually because, as we'll talk about here in a second, he is being held at gunpoint. Like I just mentioned, the person with the boots from last season definitely introduced themselves to him in some violent way because we hear a crash in the pantry. All of a sudden, we see him hurrying up and running out of there, and then we'll talk about the evidence that we have to support that here in a second. Now, notice what's in the notebook is actually a drawing of Lucille. Turns out Charlie Adlard's a lot better drawer than Negan is. Kind of funny there. Also, notice when Gabriel's raiding the weapons, one of the weapons that we see in that weapons chest, that machete, is Rick's red-handled machete from Season 5, the infamous one. He makes the promise to Gareth, I'm going to kill you with it. Very similar promise he makes to Negan at the start of this season. Rick's story arc by the end of All Out War will be not completing that promise, which is a good thing in that context. So we'll get there when we get to All Out War. However, at this point, that's all I'm going to say because I don't want to spoil anything. Notice when Gabriel's driving away, a second head pops up in the driver's seat, or in the passenger seat next to Gabriel, who's in the driver's seat. This is our evidence that there was another person holding him at gunpoint, making him run around, do all this stuff. Obviously, Gabriel's not the bad guy here. They are. And then this person's going to wind up being one of those garbage pail kids we see at the end of the episode. Moving on from there, we see Gregory having discussions with Rick. Rick's trying to convince him to get the people of the hilltop to fight them in war. Not fight them in war, but to fight with them in a war against the Saviors. He intentionally misuses Maggie's name again, calling her Margaret. I thought it would have been great if she punched him in the face right there again, or if Rick punched him. In the comic, Rick beats up Gregory, which is pretty awesome, but it doesn't look like they're going to go that route in the show. He also calls Rick the wrong name. He calls him Ricky, which is actually, well, it's not that far off from Rick's actual name. It's just with a Y. He actually nearly got Rick's actual name, which is Richie. We find that out in The Walking Dead, the Alien comic, which is all about Rick's brother and Rick's brother's death. Gregory shuts everyone down. He basically says, I'm good with the peace we have with the Saviors. Notice how here when Gregory's having this conversation with them, he is posed in front of a portrait of George Washington. George Washington being someone who fought in a revolution to revolt against the oppressive government at hand. In this case, George Washington is representing Rick, who is going to fight against Negan, the current threat at hand, who is this current dictator that is just completely abusing his powers. We see another character who we've seen before. She only cameoed kind of in an episode. She showed up for like half a scene and then was gone. This character's name is Berta. She is playing Brianna's role from the Walking Dead comics. Brianna is the person who's always hanging out with baby Herschel. Enid convinced all of these different people of the Hilltop, not like there's that many of them, but convinced a couple people in the Hilltop to join them in fighting the Saviors. We also see that one dude who helped out with the compound raid from last season there again. He got his arm broken by Daryl. Notice how Daryl says we'll blow him up, burn him to the ground. That'll come back and play at the end of the episode or towards the middle of the episode. Jesus says it's time to introduce you to King Ezekiel, and then we go to the Sanctuary. This comes straight from the Walking Dead comics. This is when we very first are introduced to the kingdom. At this point, we had not met the kingdom before. Notice how when they're meeting the kingdom, they put everyone in a lineup. They put Rick's group in a lineup, very similar to the way Negan put everyone in a lineup. The only difference is here it's not hostile, whereas there it was. The whole thing about the kingdom this episode is that they are going to be taking the non-hostile route of things, that they're going to be referring to. We'll get there later when we talk about that for the second time. Richard is wanting to revolt against the saviors, and Jesus basically tells him today's your lucky day. Once we cut to the kingdom, we actually see a lot of cool stuff here. So first of all, most obvious details is the fact that when we hear Jesus say, "Oh, they can fight," we immediately cut to a scene of the new soldiers who are being trained for the kingdom's military. This is going to be for the kingdom guard. These people are all just running around doing their training. Rick seeing them, he's kind of happy because he sees future soldiers. Notice here in the background, though, at this top left picture, in this pavilion, there are people doing stick fighting, showing Morgan's influence over the kingdom. Morgan explains to Daryl and Rick that Carol was there, and then she got better and she left. He is respecting Carol's wishes and not telling them where she is. He also mentions the fact that he had to kill a savior. Cut to a scene pretty much pulled straight from the Walking Dead comics, where Rick winds up meeting King Ezekiel, seeing his tiger. It's a pretty awesome scene. This comes straight from The Walking Dead issue 108. This is a great scene from the comic as well. I forgot to mention Ezekiel has a tiger. Alexandria, the hilltop, and the kingdom, all three communities have something in common. We all serve the saviors. Join us in fighting the saviors. This is a great scene. This whole sequence where Rick is trying to convince Ezekiel to join his fight is one of my favorite scenes of the episode. I think it's just some great conversations coming up here with the Rock and the Road story, and I really like this whole connection. Then Morgan learns about the fact that Glenn, Abraham, Olivia, Eugene, and Spencer were all killed, except for Eugene was just taken. Daryl was also taken. He learns about all of that. He's bummed out by that. I really wish we had more scenes with Glenn and Morgan, because the two of them had very similar philosophies. They didn't like to kill. They would avoid it at all costs, everything like that. And yet the sad thing is, Glenn already died, so we just are never going to get this interesting stuff that we could have seen. Richard says if we can strike them first, together we can beat them, which was Rick's plan back in season 6. Morgan says if we can find another way, we have to. It bums out everyone in the room, pretty much. He says, just holding on to Negan, just capturing Negan, maybe that's all that it needs to end the war. Maybe that's all it needs to end the violence. That all alludes to future events of what will happen to Negan in the Walking Dead comic series, which will be adapted into the show at some point, most likely. Rick gives a great speech, his story about the rock in the road. We'll break down the full meaning of that here in a second. Just notice that the first line of this is "when I was a kid," which is very similar to his "We Are the Walking Dead" speech, starting with "when I was a child." The speeches are pretty cool. They both serve the same job, which is to unite the people, get them to join his cause. In that episode, the "We Are the Walking Dead" speech, that was trying to get everyone to join him in going to DC, because he could see people were hungry. They were on the verge of dying. Everyone was, including him. He knew they just needed to make it these final few steps. They were going to get to DC, and everything was going to be fine once they got there. So it's a great scene there. It's a great scene here. In this case, he's trying to get them all to join his fight against the saviors. So he tells his story. The best part of this is when he's explaining it. You see Jerry's reaction. He's all happy about the story. But once again, we'll break down the meaning of it all here in a second. King Ezekiel's reaction to the story is a bit different. He's silent, contemplating what he should do. He says he'll deliver his decree in the morning, aka he'll give his final saying in the morning. So the story of the rock in the road goes like this, according to Rick. There's a rock in the road. The king put it there. Underneath it is a bag of gold. Everyone would walk past it, avoid it. Horses would trip and die on it. Then one day a family rolled past with a whole bunch of alcohol. And this alcohol they brewed, and it was their last saving grace. They hit this rock, the carriage went over this cliff, the alcohol spilt out, the family was in ruins, they were going to die. The little girl who was there, she dug at the rock till her hands bled, pulled it away underneath because she wondered why it was still there, because why is it there if it's just going to hurt people? Why wouldn't anyone do anything about it before? So she digs at it to get rid of it so that it can never hurt anyone the same way it hurt her. Once she finally pulls it away, she sees the bag of gold underneath. It was because the king felt that whoever moved the rock deserved the reward, which is a great story, great parallel to this. If you didn't know, the rock in the road is symbolism for Negan. Negan is the rock in the road. Rick is wondering why he's still there if he's just going to hurt people. And of course, the horses that are going to trip and fall and die on this rock, in this case, are Glenn and Abraham, who got their heads brutally beat in, as well as Olivia and Spencer. Rick is the little girl who's going to wind up moving the rock and getting the reward he's seeking, the reward he knows everyone is seeking. Once the saviors are gone, they can finally have some peace, life, afterward, which is going to be a life filled with prosperity. Benjamin bumps into Carol in the woods. They have a little interaction. We'll get into more about it later when we talk about Benjamin's conversation with King Ezekiel. Other than that, it was just kind of nice to see Carol back out and doing stuff again. She gives him some advice on how to stay hidden in the woods, and then she watches him leave. Moving right along to King Ezekiel reading a bedtime story to Benjamin's little brother. The bedtime story that he's reading is Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. We hear the final part of it, free at last, free at last. Here's what I was talking about earlier with some more historical connections and everything like that, with the kingdom taking the peaceful route again, is obviously right here. If you know your history, you know that Ezekiel is going to decline Rick's offer. What I mean by this is Martin Luther King was another revolutionist. He was fighting for black rights. He was fighting for equality. And here, Ezekiel is telling this story. Of course, Martin Luther King is representative of Ezekiel. He is going to be fighting for freedom, fighting for equality, fighting for peace, and yet he's going to be doing it in a non-violent way. So we know he's not going to join Rick's cause because he is Martin Luther King in this scenario. Benjamin tells Ezekiel that he went for a walk in the woods. He saw Carol. She asked why he keeps water and food for extra people in case he runs into them. He tells her everyone needs to stick together. Then he tells Ezekiel that that is the same reason they need to say yes to Rick. He gives a quote from his father, who's deceased. He says, "If you're asked to be the hero, be a hero." I have a theory that that might be what killed his father, was if his father was asked to be the hero, went to be the hero by Ezekiel, he was asked to be the hero, and he wound up dying. That is also another big, huge reason Ezekiel is not going to risk it in this war with the Saviors. He doesn't want to put Benjamin in harm's way. I really do feel like Benjamin's going to wind up being a casualty as a result of all-out war. I don't want that to be happening because I feel like they're setting him up to be a good character. I know that could just be setting him up so that his death is more impactful. I really like to see it as they're setting him up to be a good character. I would like to see him stay around for a while. However, I know deep down he's going to wind up being a casualty of all-out war. Maybe he's the one who gets Ezekiel and Morgan to join the war with Rick. There's been some other people talking about that, such as Trevs Chan, and I think that's a good theory. Ezekiel tells Benjamin that both his father and Ezekiel would be and are very proud of Benjamin, so it's a touching scene there. Cut to the next day, we hear Ezekiel's ruling of he's not going to risk it, he is not going to put his people in the way, but we see some handicapped people and some non-handicapped people in the background. We see some people who have these lost limbs and everything like that in the background, training with bow and arrows. This is also really interesting because Ezekiel is talking about how the last time he risked things against the walkers, this was the result of people losing their limbs and everything like that. And he says, I have to try to keep this peace. Notice how this dude with the bow's hand, his missing hand, looks very similar to Merle's missing hand. It might be the same prop. I honestly think it's the same prop that they just reworked because that just looks so dang similar. I really do feel like they just reused it. I don't know. I don't have too much of a problem with it. I think Merle's awesome, and so seeing his arm back in use is pretty cool. So once again, Ezekiel tells Rick that he's going to try and keep the peace. Notice in the background, Benjamin's training with the staff that Morgan's been teaching him with. Then he tells Rick that although the kingdom will not help them in the war, they will harbor Daryl, and this will be his sanctuary so that he can avoid being caught by the Saviors. As they're on their way out, Rosita kind of snaps at Sasha, telling them that they're not friends, which is pretty stupid because Rosita is all over the place this season. One day she's all good, the next 2 minutes later she's shooting Lucille. At this point, she was nice to Sasha all the way through season 7 so far. They've only had good interactions, and now all of a sudden she's against her. Morgan tries to convince Rick to stay at the kingdom, tries to convince Rick that they're going to work together. They can talk to King Ezekiel together, convince him together. Rick doesn't take it, and he heads out. Daryl tries to leave. Rick makes him stay. Daryl gets all mad. I really like this line. He says, try to talk to Ezekiel, and then he says, or stare him into submission. This goes along with what I've been saying in my reviews all season long, is that Daryl's kind of devolved into this silent character who just kind of grumbles a lot. I hate it. I think Daryl's character used to be awesome. Now I'm just sick of it, and I want him to go back to the way he used to be or die. One of the two. They gotta make him a good character again, or they just gotta kill him. I don't know which of the two. Personally, he killed Glenn, and I know a lot of people don't think he killed Glenn. They're going to argue with me, but personally, I feel he killed Glenn. He got Glenn killed. Even Negan feels that he got Glenn killed, so I'm going to say they need to kill Daryl. We hear Negan give a eulogy for Fat Joey on the radio, which is pretty funny, before we see an epic scene when Rick and everyone is de-arming these explosives. Once again, bringing up that line from Daryl, blow them up, burn them to the ground if we find the right stuff. They have found the right stuff. They found a ton of dynamite, a ton of RPGs. Fat Joey's actually the one who laid these explosives. We found that out from the conversation Carl overheard in the truck before he shot those saviors up. Rosita sets down a faulty TNT thing. Good thing she did, because we'll see it blow up here in a second. This Walker herd rounds the corner. Everyone's panicking. They're going to have to cover their tracks one way or another, so they're going to move these cars back, which is going to take some time, which is a bummer because this herd is super close now. Jesus is saying we're stealing their explosives. It won't matter either way. I agree with Jesus. I don't quite know why they did it, although Rick says we might need this herd, so maybe he's planning on getting it to the quarry, trapping it in the quarry again, and then weaponizing it for all-out war, which would be awesome. Really cool to see that quarry brought back if they do, and it would also be a sweet way to see them weaponize walkers the same kind of way that the governor used to. So the walkers kind of are invading on their personal space. Sasha and Jesus have to run back to the hilltop on foot. Rick tells him, tell Maggie we're not giving up. This herd is super close to everyone. They surround this car that Carl, Rosita, Tara are in. Very reminiscent of that Walker herd from season 4 that kind of showed up out of nowhere, surrounded the car that Daryl, Tyrese, Michonne, and Bob were all in. I think those were the only ones on that run. They all got surrounded in that car, and then they got out of there the same way these characters are about to. This starts the coolest scene of the episode, one of the best scenes of the series. Rick gives the signal to Michonne, who's in the opposite car, for there's this big, huge steel cable running between the two cars. They start driving, and it mows down the entire herd. It is literally like a Walker lawnmower. It just clotheslines them all at like the waist or the legs. You see limbs go flying. The screen's getting all bloody. You see a shot of Rick. The blood's flying past him. It is incredible. This scene is awesome. Also, I want to talk about the fact that this whole strategy would have been really, really useful back in Season 6 with that huge Walker herd. I know it wouldn't have cleared out the whole herd, but I think if they got some people who were willing to sacrifice themselves for everyone else, this would actually be a pretty sweet plan for them to drive these cars along like Marshall and Redding or whatever, like that little shot that right there, and which is, I think was like supposed to be the green or red marker, I don't know, one of the two, the green or red from Season 6. Also, this whole shot of this camera angle where the blood's flying all over the camera, and then we see Rick in this red shot where the blood's flying past him, very reminiscent of The Distance from Season 5. We see Rick and Michonne get into that car with everyone else, they drive away, then that faulty piece of TNT explodes, killing a ton of walkers. Seeing how powerful this TNT is, all the explosive that they got is going to be extremely powerful against the Saviors. Notice this line from Michonne here at the bottom, "We're the ones who live," is very reminiscent of Andrea's lines from the comic, "We don't die." That's kind of Andrea's motto in the comic, and that seems to be Michonne's motto in the show. So Rick and everyone get back to Alexandria. They get there because they don't want the Saviors to show up looking for Daryl without them there. Sure enough, the Saviors show up looking for Daryl right as they get there. They turn the place upside down after this little conversation here with Simon, basically saying, we're looking for Daryl, we're not here for a tribute. Rick has to play it off as if he didn't know Daryl was missing. They basically destroy everything, all the medicine they destroy. I don't quite know why they did what they did. They just kind of made a mess of the place just for the sake of making a mess of this place. Simon comments how barren their shelves are. This is the first Rick is seeing of these shelves. He does not know what happened. He does not know that they were raided entirely by Gabriel and that other person. Simon says, my apology for leaving the place a mess. Then he basically tells Rick, if Daryl shows up again, we're going to make you cut him apart with that hatchet. Once again, bringing back this idea of mutilation with the hatchet. At some point in the future, they are setting this up way too much to where either Rick is going to lose his hand, just like in the Walking Dead comics, which is what I'm voting for. I want Negan to make either Carl or Daryl cut Rick's hand off, one of the two of them to cut Rick's hand off, or Negan could cut Rick's hand off, I don't care, just as long as it's with that hatchet, I think it'd be cool. Or they're going to make Rick cut Daryl's hand off, and it'll bring Daryl's story full circle with Merle's story, who also got his hand cut off as a result of the actions of Rick. They actually find out that the reason Gabriel threw that Bible on the floor is because he left a note in there saying boat. This is, of course, referring to the from last episode where Rick and Morgan were scavenging at. We have this little conversation with Aaron and Eric about please don't go, you might die, basically is what they're saying. It's pretty interesting knowing what happens in the All Out War story arc and then hearing this line again. This was pulled straight from the Walking Dead comics as well. So Rick and everyone goes to this boat looking for Gabriel. They don't find him, so they continue to look around in the area. All of a sudden, this big, huge army, notice there are men and women there, kind of around the corner, tons of guns and everything like that. We cut to a shot of Rick smiling, and a lot of people are wondering, why is he smiling? It's because he found his new best friend. Episode title for Season 7, Episode 10 is called New Best Friend. He found his new best friend. He's been looking the whole episode for an army to help him fight the Saviors. Now he finds it. Overall, this was a really amazing episode. I thought this one was great. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think it was just such a good episode. One of the best of the season for sure, and it really came at the right time considering Season 7's first half wasn't all that amazing. Thank you guys all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. D-Man,